Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Pangolin Advisor and I'll be analyzing the Sophon holes in Endless Space 2. This video is a guide, the first of its kind in fact, and I'm planning to make this a series where I analyze the ship types for every single faction there is in Endless Space 2. And my goal is to compare them against each other, say what kind of faction has the best ship in one regard, for instance, or tell you which ship is built for what kind of purpose and where it perhaps lacks some kind of a feature to make it stand out. And I'll be giving you my opinion on the preferred way of setting up those ships with different types of weapon modules, defensive modules, utility modules, and all of that good stuff. However, this guide may be a little bit on the advanced side, not super advanced, but a little bit on that advanced side. So if you feel lost at any point while watching this video, feel free to check out my other videos on Endless Space 2, either regarding the fleet composition, I'll be linking that in the description, as well as just my basic Endless Space 2 tutorial, which is quite dated, because it was recorded when the game was still to be released, but it still works in terms of understanding game mechanics, so I'll be linking that one as well, especially since it's from my old channel. Without any further ado, let us start talking about the Sophon ships. Of course, you could be wondering why I decided to start with the Sophon ships, and the answer is quite simple. It's because Sophons are a very rookie-friendly faction. They have few complex mechanics, and are easy to understand, and in fact their ship designs follow the same fashion, with many of them being very standardized and with nothing crazy happening. This makes them a very good point of reference for other future guides of a similar fashion. So without further ado, there's one last thing that I'd like to mention actually, and that is the fact that sure, this all sounds great and it sounds like a boring set of videos, so let's actually start with something that isn't boring, because nobody likes boredom. Let's start with the Sophon's attacker ship. It's usually called Accelerator by default, and it's a Giga-class ship. And if we have a look at it, you're going to probably fall in love with it. So, for the first thing I need to make a side note of is the color scheme you can see. If you're watching this and you're confused, don't be alarmed, those are still Sophons, and I don't have the classical white and blue color palette for this ship, mostly because I just used a reskin, which you can also get for free from Games Together website. It's an official reskin and remodel of certain factions, so I highly recommend that. But going back on topic and all to the Giga-class, as you can see there's something kind of weird going on already. Let us count the modules that this ship has. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. 6 modules. That's an unusually high amount for an attacker class, you might think, and you'd be absolutely correct. Attacker class ships usually have only 5 modules, but the Sophons now, they're awesome. They gave their ship 6 modules, which already puts it ahead in the balance of power when compared to its cousins. Now, only 2 of those modules can have weapons installed on top of them, and one of them is a top-mounted gun, while the other is a broadside weapon. Generally speaking, top-mounted guns are always better and more potent than broadsides, because the top-mounted guns have 270-degree arc of fire, whereas the broadsides only have 120 degrees. Sure, you have 2 broadsides, but even adding that, that's only 240 degrees firing arc, and more importantly, your ships will basically never fire out targets from both sides of the ship, so one gun will almost always stay idle. Now, going back on to the topic of this particular ship, 2 gun placements, and then what else does it have? It has a whopping amount of 3 dedicated defensive modules and 1 defensive/utility module to boot. So by default it can have up to 4 defensive modules, making it incredibly tanky when compared to any other ship of its class in the early game. It's amazing, and it's especially good because you don't even need to bother installing engine of its only potential utility slot, because you're playing as the Sophons. You start with 4 movement speed, so it is going to be plenty enough in the early game should you face heavy aggression, because that, in my opinion, is where this ship shines brightest, in defending against early aggression. If you sense that somebody's trying to play a trick on you and pull one over you real fast in the game. You just make a bunch of those bad boys and have them guard your systems, and they will not budge. They will trade very effectively with their guns, and they are still going to stay hovering over your systems, giving you valuable time to create a better battle plan against the invaders and push them back. They are excellent for that choice. They are somewhat less effective as early game rushing tools instead, however, because they do only have 2 guns to start with, which is standard. Don't be surprised by me saying that it's only 2. But still, that's not necessarily enough to break through enemy ships, and they only have a crew complement of 100, so again, they are very bad at invading planets. So, early game defensive role, anti-rush role, that's excellent. But let us have a quick look at what happens when you upgrade this bad boy. After being upgraded, the Kilo-class has an additional defensive module, a dedicated utility module, and a blank module which can install pretty much anything other than a squadron module. And squadron modules are simply reserved for coordinator and carrier class ships. So that's nothing unusual. So what do I see right now? A ship that can have potentially up to 3 weapon modules, which isn't actually all that impressive for an upgraded attacker class. There are many attacker class ships that actually have more than that. And you will never want to go up against, let's say, United Empire's attacker that can just wreck you with firepower. However, it still has a very valuable and useful role even in the late game, because as you can see, this ship can still, even in late game, have an impressive amount of defensive modules. So if you just use up all what you can potentially use, you have 6 defensive modules. And what's so very special about that fact is that this ship has more defensive modules when upgraded than your coordinator ship has, and a coordinator is your medium-sized ship, which often fulfills the role of a tank in many factions. This guy has more defensive modules than your primarily defensive module dedicated ship. That's how crazy it is. Moreover, it also has more defensive modules than many classic tank choices of your competing factions as well. So it's very unique. Of course, it does have little HP, 2000 by default, because it is only an attacker ship, but it will not lose this HP very fast. If you want to use it in late game, I would say that they can do a good job screening out for your carrier ships. All I would do personally is let's just take those things apart. What I would do with it personally is just give it some intensifier of some sort to boost the amount of damage you can dish out with this ship, then give it 3 weapons that fit, so in this case it will be laser type of weapons or beam type of weapons, and then just give it as many defensive modules as you still can fit on top of it. And now we've got a very reliable ship that can take the damage into the face. It can also take the damage for your carrier to some extent. It can only soak up the damage that the enemy protector and coordinator ships fire, because they prioritize targeting those guys over carriers, which might sound insignificant, but against some factions, such as the Unfallen for instance, that have treacherously powerful coordinator ships, this is a very good feature, and it will help you take some of the workload off of your carriers in the late game. Moreover, for a tank offensive hybrid that this is, this guy can actually dish out a meaningful amount of damage, and it's nothing to scoff at really. So honestly, I think this ship is pure awesome. It is useful in early game, it is useful in late game, and I oftentimes include this design when looking for a partner for my carriers. It's just so reliable, quite versatile, although you have to keep in mind you are limited in terms of utility slots. But still, you cannot go wrong with this design, and I recommend going for it in pretty much every matchup you play. Without further ado, let us now move on to the next ship, the Protector. The next ship type I would like to discuss are the Protectors. Their default names are magnets in a Sophon fleet, but the ship class is a Deka-class, so let's have a quick look at it. And I'll tell you right away that even though they are called Protectors and they have bonuses for defensive modules, they're not very good at protecting, and I would never use them for such role. By default, they have only 1 defensive module, and it's shared with a utility module if you want to use utility instead. It has 1 side-mounted gun and 3 dedicated utility modules. If you expect those ships to take the hit for your carriers or for your hunters or whatever, sure, they'll take a hit, maybe two, they have 2500 HP, but they'll still blow up incredibly fast on the battlefield, and you shouldn't expect them to last because they're not going to, aside from perhaps the early game when weapons don't pack too much of a punch just yet. What is the role, you might wonder? Do they even have a niche? Yes, they do, and allow me to elaborate by looking at the upgraded version of this ship. As you can see, upgrading gives you an extra defensive module, utility module, and a blank module for you to use as you see fit. And again, we see very little in the defense department and a lot in terms of utility modules. You can install so many of them, it's incredible. So I think it's clear that this ship is not meant to be used as a protector. This is a dedicated support fleet. Truthfully, and not even a battle support ship at that. Right now in the current metagame, I would say it's best used as a taxi ship. What you need to do is install a bunch of fueled fleet accelerators which increase the speed of your fleet, and just use those ships to ferry your fleets around the galaxy at incredible speeds. No, of course, this is somewhat abusable, and I expect this feature to be probably balanced at some point, so you might not be able to use those ships in such a way eventually, but the important thing to notice is that it also has other features that benefit you indirectly. For instance, you can give it a ton of additional manpower and make those ships very good at ferrying troops to hostile planets to invade them. And those ships are very good at that. They're cheap and affordable, they can house a very large amount of troops on them with the maximum amount of troop compartments, of course. And honestly, to make this ship good, you don't even need anything else. I mean, sure, you could install an engine instead of one of the troop compartments if you wanted to, or needed to rather. That's fine as well, although keep in mind that the Sophon ships are relatively fast in their own right, so you don't always need to do that, especially in the early game. If you do end up with the upper hand in the early game and you are on the offensive, you may want to make a few of those bad boys, not even give them an engine, just have them move towards the enemy planets and then conquer them with your inferior Sophon troops. True, but you have a lot of them, provided that your Emperor can support the amount of manpower you can put onto those ships. I'll say those two users are the best users of the ship, and other than those two, there is much to look at here, so let us move on. Next up, we have the Hunters, who are commonly referred to as smashers in a Sophon fleet, and are based on the Giga-class ship hull. If we have a quick look at it, however, we can quickly see... Let's just find it, there we go. If we have a quick look at it, we can quickly see that unfortunately its weapon modules by default are somewhat unimpressive, with only 3 to start with, which is at the lower end of the spectrum for the ships of this class. However, as you can also see, upgrading this ship is very much worthwhile if you plan to use this ship as your main source of damage, because upgrades bring the ship more in line with its competition by having up to 5 potential weapon modules. It's worth noting that 2 of them are top mounted, although obviously every single large module slot is always top mounted, so this is nothing special in that regard. Now, if you want to talk about defensive modules, for instance, as you can see, this ship also has quite a lot of them, but this isn't quite as special as it was for the Kilo-class. There are other hunter types that also boast the same amount of defensive modules, and they can perform their jobs arguably somewhat better. You also have 1 default utility slot and 1 extra, which is very important if you want to boost the damage you want to deal, and also obviously utility/defense slot. So overall, what are my impressions of this ship? Well, I'll say that sure, you could use this ship as your main source of damage, but there's nothing to write home about, honestly. This is a decent ship. It is a jack of all trades in its class, and it's very similar, in fact, to Lumeri's design of hunter ships. Except this one is actually, I would say, somewhat weaker, because the Lumeri's ship design has more modules overall, which does make it somewhat of a superior option. And in this case, in the Sophon's fleet, again, Sophons have better options. I don't think this is the optimal one, but if you do go with it, it will not let you down. It is, like I said, decent, and not really worthy of complaining. It also looks gorgeous, and looks are always important in my mind. Sophon's coordinator ship is usually nicknamed Ring, and its ship hull is a Peta-class. Let's have a quick look at it, and you'll quickly see that unupgraded, this ship is adept at fulfilling either a support or a tank role with up to 4 potential utility modules, by default again ignoring the upgraded ones, and up to 4 potential defensive modules. This means that you have a large amount of versatility with those ships, and by unlocking this design you can create various sub-designs of your own, either working as tanks or supports, or, best idea, as tanks as support. If you upgrade this ship, you also get an additional 3 modules, so nothing out of the ordinary there, with one of those modules being a large one. So what do I have to say about this ship? Well, honestly, there are better ships at either supportive or tanky role in either faction, but this ship can perform both of these roles relatively well. Not as well as it could, but it simply pays for its versatility with efficiency. If you want to get a lot of flotilla effects working for your fleet, it is indeed a good idea to upgrade this ship, which lets you install things such flotilla, fleet shield generator, cloaking, decloaking, extra size in battles, extra speed for your flotilla, you name it, you have a lot of options right there. You can also give it some decent enough weapons, for instance the blast effect battery, which can affect entire flotillas, and it's not a bad idea to bring it if you want to. It can be quite tanky as well, so again, it's pure tank support. It can be customized to focus exclusively on just one of those 2 tasks, and it will do fine at the not amazing, but fine. And I would say that it's somewhat similar to its hunter cousin in usefulness, but I do believe it is more useful than its hunter cousin purely because of what you can do with this ship. Look at this monstrosity I created, it's crazy, it can do anything. It also looks, I actually kind of really like its simplistic design, but aesthetics are not necessarily a part of this guide, but hey, why not talk about them? This is a gorgeous ship as well. Either way, not a bad ship, fairly decent. Nothing to write home about yet again. Quite typical, quite standard, and decent enough of a tank. And now for the moment you have doubtlessly been waiting for. It's time for the carrier. Sophon carriers are nicknamed colliders based on the Yotta-class design, and as you can quite quickly notice, they are unlike their smaller cousins in the fleet. They are fairly specialized. By default they boast up to 5 weapon modules, which is already pretty decent, but what's even more important is that they also have up to 5 defensive modules. Now, of course, you never really want to sacrifice a defensive module for an offensive module, so for this one I'll definitely go for a weapon rather than a defensive module, and this will leave you with 5 offensive modules and 4 defensive modules, which is actually a very good amount on a carrier. Unupgraded, it will still have 1 utility slot for you to use as well, so if you want to pump its damage even higher, you can do so quite easily by installing a damage amplifier and then a bunch of fitting weapons on top of that. Now, in general, I would say that this ship is an excellent fighter, having a very good balance of both defensive and offensive capabilities, and it can really put other carriers to shame, especially when you're comparing them in non-upgraded variants. However, if you were to upgrade this ship, it will still prove its worth and show you amazing value, because it will give you up to 3 extra potential weapon slots to play around with, and even more defensive and utility slots as well. So this ship is actually what I would call a jack of all trades done right. For the very simple reason that it bears more weapons than most ships of similar design, and it can bear more defenses than most ships of similar design. It might be a little bit lacking in utility department, sure, but it's still very versatile. And overall, just an amazing ship to have. I see no reason not to include it in your Sophon fleet, because it will definitely pay its dues. And while you may argue that carrier weapons and offensive modules is not a good idea because they only have veteran pilots, which doesn't boost the damage of the guns, well sure, but you have to keep in mind that the good idea about bringing carriers as your main source of damage is that those guys aren't going down. If you bring in like 20 small ships as your main source of damage and the enemy destroys 5 of them over the course of the battle, during the course of this single battle, your damage output will keep going down. whereas if you instead bring a single carrier, your damage output will stay the same. Truly impressive and truly magnificent. This ship is a beauty and it performs extraordinarily well and is truly a testament to the Sophon industrious ingenuity, or rather scientific one I should say. Keep in mind that you usually also have the scientific advantage over your opponents. You can really make this ship an absolute tormentor and wreck other lesser carrier designs of races such as, for instance, even the Creevers, who will not be able to go toe-to-toe with this monstrosity. This finally leaves us with the more boring designs. First of all, let's talk about the colony ship, which is named Hector-class, and it's just a colonizer and there's nothing special about it, except there's one thing you need to keep in mind. With its 3 utility modules, it can actually be faster than your dedicated scout ship from the Deka-class, which is an explorer ship, but it doesn't have as many utility modules without upgrading. As you can see, this one has 3, but only because I researched an upgrade. It starts with only 2 utility modules and 2 weapon modules. This means that if you just want to travel far and wide as the Sophons, you're better off using your colony ship and just fitting with it with as many engines as you can. However, you have to keep in mind that the colony vessel cannot have any probes, whereas this is their exploration ship, the Deka-class design. And what can I say about this? It's very standard. It stands with 2 utility slots and 2 weapon modules, and you can get an extra 3rd utility slot in the late game, which is usually meaningless, I would say. Now, it's nice that the Sophons recognize that there's no point in putting armor on shielding on ships that are meant to be your scouting vessels alone. You can put 2 weapons on the ship, which is actually fairly decent, I would say, for a scout ship. But I still see little point, because how often do you fight with your scout ships in your games? You just want them to move from point A to point B, to be relatively fast and to have probes. And this ship can actually do both things quite well. In fact, you don't even need to install engines on it. All you need is a bunch of probes, and even without the upgrade, you'll still get a good amount of probes and a fairly fast ship. So this guy is pretty good by the virtue of being a Sophon, but not necessarily by the virtue of being a good ship. So that's all. I discussed every single ship class and the Sophon roster, and now I'd like to hear your opinion about this guide. What do you think? I admit I was a little bit nervous. I haven't done a video in this format in quite a while. In fact, I've never done something quite like it. So I am looking for some feedback. If you think that something was missing, please let me know. If you think that maybe I was not speaking in the right way, maybe I was hard to understand, let me know about that as well. If I was saying and so on too much, also let me know, although I'm probably going to pick it up myself and then yell at myself for doing so. But either way, please just leave your comments, tell me if you like the series, and I'm definitely going to be working on at least one more video of the series. And if you give me enough support, then I'll try to give you a similar video for every single faction out there, with your feedback taken into account. I want this to be a very good, informative series, bite-sized, letting you know everything you need to know about different ship types. So there it is. It was Pangolin Advisor, also known as Pancha, so thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you online.